Well, I've just been reading the official publication of the elect Obama campaign. They call it the New York Times. At least I think it's the official publication of the re-elect Obama campaign. It certainly reads like it. I'm sure that, I'm just joking, obviously, but when you read the New York Times anymore, it's almost as if that's what they're trying to do, is to re-elect Obama. A couple of things that I found very interesting on the front page of yesterday's the New York Times. It says, U.S. is preparing for a long siege of Arab unrest. You go into the subtitle of the page inside that continues the article. It said, Mideast turmoil is a test for U.S. to shape change. How'd you like the change that Obama gave us? Well, they also want to have change in the Arab world, too. And it's not exactly working out the way they're telling us in the newspapers. I'd like to, expand on that, but generally speaking, where we've gone in, what is the result? Don't look at what they tell you in the newspaper articles and the official pronouncements out of the White House or anywhere else. Look at the results. The results are what somebody wants, what somebody's working for. The results of this change overseas, no matter what label they put on it, is more militant Islamic governments. Now, we can argue over whether they're really Islamic. I don't believe they are. I believe there's something else going on. The people at the bottom think it's Islamic, just like the people here who read the newspapers think it's Islamic. But at the top, they're working together. And it has nothing to do with Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, or Shintoism, or anything else. It's strictly power. They profess to be whatever the population is of the country over which they want to rule. That's simple. I talked about voter fraud last week. Well, it's interesting that according to the New York Times again, we have an article that says that conservatives are concerned about voter fraud. And the way it's written, it makes it appear as though these conservatives are just putting up a straw man relative to any future or current elections. But it's interesting, I have something in my hand right here that is from the Milwaukee area of the Department of Justice. And these are all the various voter fraud that was committed in the 2008 election. There's 4 on this page. There's 6 on this page. There are 5 on this page. There's 4 on this page. And these are not individuals that went and voted twice. In other words, I went down and I lied, and I went to one precinct and voted, then I went to another precinct and voted. No, what this is are individuals who were signing people up to vote from Acorn. And for instance, I won't mention names or anything else, but here's a guy who was a special registration deputy for Acorn. Here was a special registration deputy for the Community Voter Project, and on and on and on. These are individuals that are out in the community using grants from the government and that sort of thing to sign people up to vote, and they are guilty of fraud. They're signing people up fraudulently. So anyway, that's quite a number just in the Milwaukee jurisdiction. Now, I don't know how widespread this is or anything else. In other words, does it include Madison, Wisconsin? Does it include Kenosha? I just don't know. All I know is this is the cases in Milwaukee. So it'd be interesting, and I haven't looked into it, I just got a hold of this, to find out how widespread this is in other areas. But it's something they don't talk about in the press. I didn't read anything about this in the local press, but it's a local fraud. It's things that are going on in the state of Wisconsin to falsely register people to vote. So you might look into your own area to find out if the Attorney General's office in those areas, it's public domain information, by the way. You can find out what kind of voter fraud is going on in your area. I'm sure it's widespread. because we've felt it has been a problem for many years. At any rate, here is one, for instance, this is the Wall Street Journal. And here is a photograph here taken of, I'll read you the caption, a FARC, F-A-R-C, a FARC guerrilla moved position during a battle with Colombia's army in the mountains of Colombia. Now, FARC is the communist terrorist drug organization that is being financed and armed through the government of Chavez in Venezuela, right next door. Now, anything that Chavez does has to have the approval of the overall communist apparatus. So this is what's going on in Colombia. Now, it's interesting that these individuals, these photographers, this is a Reuters photograph, it says here, that this photographer can get into combat with FARC guerrillas, that he can find the FARC guerrillas, and he can be vetted with the FARC guerrillas, and they trust him to be with them. And yet the Colombian army has a tough time finding these people. But this Reuters photographer, he can find them, and he can go out with them, and is trusted enough to be with them. This sort of thing goes on all the time. Always keep that in the back of your mind when you see an article that shows things like this, that maybe something else is going on here on the behalf of the reporter himself. I know, for instance, in American history, during the communist revolutions, they call them Democrat revolutions in your history books, of 1848 in Europe, communists from the United States went to Europe to report and participated in the revolutions and sent back their reports to such entities as the New York Tribune. Likewise, when John Brown was committing murder and mayhem in Kansas, there were a number of reporters that went with him and served not only in his band, but became strategic members of his whole program of murder and mayhem and treason and so on and so forth. And they sent back reports as impartial reporters to the New York Times, the New York Tribune, the New York Herald, the Chicago Tribune, and many other newspapers. You see, a lot of times these reporters have a vested interest. I know in the days of the 1960s, when I was fighting the communist organizations in the city of Seattle, and the mayhem that they were producing out on the streets and the problems we were having with them, one of the individuals who was in the School of Journalism at that time was a man by the name of Mark Krasnowski, who was the son of Frank Krasnowski, the head of the Socialist Workers' Party, which was the more militant, more violent communist movement in those days. They started out as being followers of Leon Trotsky. When Trotsky and Stalin split, you had the official Communist Party, and then you had the Socialist Workers' Party communists of Trotsky. Well, when Mark Krasnowski graduated, and by the way, when he did, he was the head of the youth arm of this communist organization. He went to work for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. Within a relatively short period of time, became the city editor of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. The average reader had no idea who this man was, no clue whatsoever. And he went on to become an environmentalist, by the way. That's another clue for you as to the motivation behind a lot of this stuff. But people don't look at the people in the newspapers writing the newspapers, the backgrounds of some of these folks. So when you see these photographs of reporters who can find these communist rebels, but the official in the government, the army, whatever, they can't seem to find them, you have to ask yourself the question, why? Why are these people with them? So those sorts of things go on. They're not unusual. So keep those in mind. We'll see you next week. So long.